Hello and welcome to my presentation. So the film I chose was Babytooth, which I find to be a tragically beautiful story. It's morally ambiguous, emotionally charged, and culturally significant. Their bond pushes against social norms, challenging conventional ideas of protection, age, and love. So, no, Babytooth is not about a dentist, and this is the question I decided for my presentation. How can emotional authenticity become more valuable than social correctness? All right, so let's get into it. So, Baby Teeth. It was made in 2019, filmed in Sydney, and it is one of my favorite Australian films at the moment. You can stream it on some services. It was on Netflix, so I really hope you got the opportunity to see it on Netflix when it was there. If you haven't, I have provided a link at the end of the slideshow. Anyway, so Baby Tooth offers a raw and unconventional exploration of love, life, mortality through an unlikely bond between a terminally ill teenager, Miller, and a self-destructive drug dealer called Moses. The film challenges traditional narratives by the juxtaposing characters clinging to life whilst one is disassociating from it. And this is why I feel that it really represents Australian youth culture, societal expectations, and cinematic representations of illness and rebellion. And I quite love the bond that they experience, how it's very unconventional and they can really bring out the best in each other, which I thought was a really special story. It really ignores the romance and instead focuses on how polar opposites can truly help each other when I guess they least expect it. So it parallels to a Romeo and Juliet situation, a love doomed not by feuding families, by the contrasting relationships of death and pleasure, as Miller unfortunately is experiencing cancer. Now, analysing Baby Tooth allows for rich insights into contemporary Australian storytelling, character complexity, and the aesthetics of emotional realism in local cinema. In other words, how emotional authenticity becomes more valuable than social correctness, and especially when you're dealing with a fatal illness. So, basically, the film follows the central protagonist, Miller, who drives the story. We see her desires, conflicts, transformation, which aligns with the classic narrative, which focuses on the character's development. You've got the goal, Miller's desire to live fully despite her illness, and in a sense, trying to embrace teenagehood and a normal teenagehood as she battles cancer. The conflict is, of course, her illness, and in terms of her family dynamic, there's lots of tension. There's drug abuse and other ways for the family coping with Miller's illness. And it really represents this understandable dysfunction. And bringing Moses into the picture really does complement it in a sense. Now, the resolution is the emotional closure where Miller actually finds peace, and through this, we're able to find emotional authenticity and how this allows her choices to have a relationship with Moses become more liberating and freeing, despite their incredible age gap and the entire situation. I guess the last thing you want your 16-year-old daughter doing whilst being sick is being influenced by a guy much older who lives on the street and abuses drugs too. So let's dive into the narrative elements. Babytooth blends classic narrative elements with experimental structure choices to evoke the fragmented, unpredictable reality of a terminal illness and youth rebellion. The emotional impact invites viewers to experience the story as a series of raw moments rather than a conventional plot. Now, I thought this was a really smart way they do this by creating titles as they introduce new scenes, new experiences she goes through, and I find that this becomes a very intimate experience for the audience because it's kind of like a journal entry. It's like a diary entry of what Miller is experiencing, and some of the titles, for instance, there was one part, I think it was titled A Very Nice Morning. And in fact, it was an awful morning for as a viewer to watch, but for her, she gained peace from it. So it keeps you on your toes, but it really does create such a raw experience and a real experience, which I loved about this film. So yeah, the film has a non-linear and episodic version. It's divided into titles, as I said, and rather than a continuous, tightly casual plot. I think as well this is so symbolic because with facing illness, there's so many ups and downs, and it's quite an unpredictable nature. And I think that was more important because that way it doesn't glorify or sugarcoat anything, and it keeps it really raw, which I loved. So the influence of the narrative on culture. By moving away from this neat linear plot, the film reflects a fragmented, unpredictable nature of living with a terminal illness. And it also influences the reasonings behind this adolescent rebellion, which makes sense. And in terms of social order, the film resists conventional family and societal roles. This is shown through the dysfunctional way the parents are dealing with this grief and Miller's experiences with Moses and the messiness that continues through it. Now, Baby Teeth decentralizes traditional power, structures, and storytelling. So, in summary, the film's narrative from not only shapes how experience is represented, it's raw, it's disjointed, and deeply personal. And through this, it actually makes sense how authentic connection is more valuable than conforming to this conventional culture, represented through Miller and Moses's quite dysfunctional bond that is so far from conventional, yet it makes them happy. It's almost like she's got this unexpected blessing in disguise. Now, in terms of form and content, so for form, Baby Tooth presents an incredible interplay with raw emotional narrative. For content, it centers on her terrible terminal illness, and through it, the liberation and freedom from this authentic connection that she shares with Moses confirms this far from social correctness and how impacting and beautiful. In the form element function, it definitely represents the scene titles. The film goes day-to-day structure, recurring with classical music and frequent direct camera glances, which really establishes breaking that third wall and truly it takes you from watching someone's story to being truly involved in it. Now, this fragmented vignette style, I'm unsure how to pronounce that properly, as yeah, it's a great example of bringing the narrative together and the form element. And together, Baby Tooth's narrative and cinematic choices offer a deeply human portrayal of life in contemporary Australia. Raw, confusing, joyful, and painfully real, which is a great reason why I decided to review this film and analyze it. Now, the second part for form elements, the differences, you have got Miller's relationship and family dynamic, which drives our essay's question, how can emotional authenticity become more valuable than social correctness? You've got unity, tying together with the closure of Miller's piece, which at the end of the day, all audience members, they want peace for their main character. And for development, it's guided by this relationship that has tension amongst the journey of love and pain. They have a relationship of really, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. That's how they began their friendship, and that's how it ends. And a deeper dive, cinematically, this film is incredible. It often has handheld and intimate close-up captures. This aligns with the context, emotional urgency, reflecting on Miller's limited time and desire to experience life fully, especially as a dying teenager. Overall, this complements the narrative, highlights the cultural complexities. This sound design and soundtrack, I must have to add, is quite impressive. It's mainly classical music, which complements that she plays the violin in school, but it really just drags out so much emotions and sometimes creates this complex feeling with an intense scene and a heightened classical song. So for plot segmentation, um, I am just going to go through these slides. I wasn't sure if I needed to read it out one by one, but enjoy the spoilers. So we've got the setup, we have the inciting incident, the rising actions, the midpoint, turning point, climax, and resolution. Now, in terms of the scene analysis, this was a tricky one because I was going against, do I focus on this incredible scene that's so beautifully done, so abstract, cinematically is stunning, or a scene that really drives the narrative and really brings us closer to the question for our film, and I decided to do the second option. So this pivotal scene is when Moses gently suffocates Miller at her request. She doesn't pass away during the scene, but this scene is so intense to watch because it goes against that, conventional style of the main character always survives and blah blah blah, to actually seeing the beauty in putting someone out of their misery per se, and just that in itself really creates this conflict between these characters, but in saying so, it's this beautifully tragic scene and love story in a sense. So we've got that, and wow, they do not move the camera. It's all a one take, and it makes it so painfully raw and intense to watch, but so beautiful. And it really shows that love for someone can be messy and it can be unconventional, but it really just shows their value in their relationship rather than conforming to social correctness. And how this adds value? Well, the acts become symbolic of their entire relationship. This emphasizes this complexity of Miller and Moses' relationship, taking away conventional character relationships, social context, and teenage culture. The flaws and merits were really challenging because I struggled to find a flaw. But the merits, it's emotionally honest, visually striking. It's not too predictable, which I love. It resists the cliches, and the soundtrack so closely intertwined with the visuals to create that mood and character emotions. The only flaw I could find was the film's structure. Like, yes, it is broken and it's into titles. However, this could also be a merit. And the other one is how the music can sometimes contradict the visuals. However, I find this could be a plus, pro, or a con. So resources to support the essay, I want to look into more psychology readings, some color therapy, because they did such a great job with from costumes to color palettes, set design, all of that jazz. And I think that really influenced such an incredible film, and it was so visually striking. I want to do some mental health studies and perhaps bring that into the essay. Traditional structures is what I'll look into too, and the unit material, just so we can kind of create a contrast and truly give respect to such an incredible film. And lastly, my reference list. Now, these were a few examples, and I just wanted to add that reference 1 that relates to the concepts of structure and motifs. Reference 2 just really helps to describe the viewing experience, the central motives, the aesthetics. The third reference represents Australian cinema formal play and openness, so it kind of connects to the story and the characters. And then the last reference ties in a lot about cultural identity. The other references are involved in what we've learnt in class so far. Anyways, if you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend it. I hope you've loved it and loved hearing about it. And yeah, thank you for listening. And that scene analysis, I will add, I didn't describe it in a very floral way. However, that scene is so sharp and so deep, but there's not much else that really comes from it other than they're in a bedroom and she confesses that she can't really breathe and she's done. her body is done. And as he tries to suffocate her with this pillow, there's these close-ups to show this emotional pull and push, as well as just sitting in the silence. There's no music involved. There's purely just a one-take handheld camera, which really creates this intimate moment. And as she kind of comes out after being suffocated and goes, "No, I can't do this," it gives this kind of closure for the audience. But it's raw and it's real and it's messy. And I think Baby Teeth is an incredible example of a film where the narrative is strong, it's creative, it's cinematically stunning, and it really gives a great representation of how love is messy and connections don't always have to be focused just on the romance. It's deeper than that.